take spreadsheet and then build the avatar of your customer. So simple, not too hard. Just build on what the avatar, if you don't know what it is, what is your person, the listener, like who do you want to talk to? Just write down your ideas. This is my ideas. These are all my ideas. Write down the bad ideas and the good ideas, because when you write down the bad ideas, they get out of your head. So you record that. You could edit later, but then write down, the spreadsheet of avatar of the customer. You could look that online, what that is. But basically it's like, what was, after you find out your niche or whatever, what is the person that's going to listen to, what kind of music they listen to, what kind of movies they like, what's their political affiliations, what's this and this.
Are you not getting the downloads you desire? Unsure about how to promote your podcast effectively, or struggling to monetize your work? Well, you've just found the resource you need. Hi and welcome to Mics to Millions, the podcast that brings you exclusive, in-depth conversations with top-tier hosts in the health and wellness industry to help you grow your podcast. I'm your host, Sam Breakgear, co-founder of PodWritten, a podcast booking agency for health and wellness businesses. In every episode, we dive deep into what it really takes to get more podcast listeners, successfully promote your show, and monetize your work. Remember, if you like the show, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps us grow, and in doing so, we can continue to offer you valuable insights and podcast growth tips. And now, let's get into it. My guest today is the host of Long Shot Leaders, a podcast that shares the stories and secrets of leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and various high achievers. The show interviews people from all walks of life and explores their struggles, shortcomings, challenges, and setbacks that have ultimately led to their growth and betterment. My guest is a man with a very diverse and eclectic past in stand-up comedy, performing at the Comedy Store and Laugh Factory, as well as a background in acting and promoting nightclubs. And in his later years, went on to create a business selling tarps. In its first year, the company generated over $500,000 and has become a multi-million-dollar a year business. And when it comes to my guest today, this is just a small snapshot of what he has accomplished and achieved. I really cannot wait to learn more about you and your work. Michael Stein, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, I think we can potentially talk for hours, but if you can, would you be able to summarize like your background and how you ended up in podcasting?
Well, I do that podcast, Long Shot Leaders. And the reason why I do it, my typical story is I consider myself a long shot. And my story is my grandmother escaped the Russian concentration camps on her way to America. My dad was a New York homeless street kid, and he became a multimillionaire only to become homeless again. Because I was the youngest in the family, I had to sleep in the same room with my grandmother until I was 9 years old. And I'd hear that story about, the Russian concentration camps. And I was a long shot. I was born prematurely. I wasn't planned. I had ADHD and dyslexia and a learning disability. And it really, was kind of like, a basket case as a kid. And I didn't have any success other than making people laugh or making fun of myself or other things. And so it was my first bit of success. But then I really, the movie, like most American kids, the movie Rocky, when I was 11 years old, I saw this movie. I was like, wow, this sings to me, because here's a guy that's like me. He's funny. He fails a lot, but he keeps on getting back up. The only difference between Rocky and myself was that he was physically fit. So I decided from that day on, I'm going to become physically fit. So I worked out every day. And by the time I was 16, I was successful at that. I became a physical fitness trainer while I was in high school. And then I started going to Gold's Gym, and I was, very successful at that. So I said, wait, there's two things I could be successful at: funny, and I could be physically fit and, and do that. So then I said, time plus effort equals success. Long story short, I got into, I told my tutor, I said, I want to be in my school. I said, I want to be a entrepreneur, a stand-up comedian, and an actor. And she goes, you should work with their hands, because not everybody's meant to do what they want to do. And I said, screw you. My dad never finished the 8th grade, and he became a multimillionaire, and I'm going to do what he did, and make money. He became a multimillionaire selling these calculators in the 70s when they were became a little smaller. They called him the calculator kid. So I said, I want to be the calculator kid. So then I started a business selling tools like he used to do before that, and it failed miserably. And I said, holy shit, maybe she's right. Well, I waited like 6 months later, and then I did stand-up comedy for the first time when I was 19, and I brought a lot of people there. And I said, I could do this with nightclubs, because nightclubs in Los Angeles are really popular, in the 80s. And I said, all right, I'm going to be a nightclub promoter. And then within 6 months, I became the #1 nightclub promoter in Los Angeles in my age bracket. And I said, wow, that's once again, time plus effort. If you just find your niche and find your thing. And then I decided I'm going to become an actor. And after 4 years of doing nightclubs, I left the nightclub business and I wrote and directed many award-winning, short film, and documentaries. One film got me close to a movie deal, but no movie deal after 4 years of no movie deal, no job. And I said, screw Hollywood, man. I'm going to make my own movie. Except by this point, all the nightclub money was gone. I was broken in debt. And I said, I'm going to make my own movie, but I got to make money again. So I said, I'm going to be an entrepreneur again. So I wanted to do something on the internet. And I chose tarps for many reasons. And I said, because I wanted to niche down and people something that people need and all that. Within 6 months, I made $500,000 on the internet. And then I was able to make my movie. I made a big movie, wrote, directed, produced, and acted with a movie with Faye Dunaway, Andy Dick, and Coolio. A lot of familiar faces that you've seen. And it didn't make me money, but since then I made that business it grew it big time since it's made well over $100 million. Long story short, I'm a long shot. I would say I've gone up and down when I said, if I was ever going to do a podcast, I'd want it to be like a Rocky kind of story about entrepreneurs that have failed and succeeded, maybe even failed again, but then ultimately succeed at the end with longevity. Because my dad kind of went through the failure and success and he kind of failed. So I thought this would be great to find out what is the algorithm of somebody that, has failed or starts from a very low point. They're a long shot, but what's the algorithm of what makes them succeed, but also sustain success? And that's why I do long shot leaders. And that's kind of like my story.
That's awesome. And I really think it's so inspiring that you do focus on overcoming the odds. I see, I suppose, in a similarity, a way of this podcast and on what you do, because I want to find that algorithm myself of what makes all these podcasters successful, because there are so many podcasts out there. Most of them fade after a few episodes. And I think creating a successful podcast is also a long shot. And I know that you started the podcast in March 2021. Obviously, that's quite deep into the pandemic or around that time. What inspired you to launch it then and there? Did being stuck at home or seeing an increase in podcasts influence your desire to do this?
No, I wanted to do it long before that. First, when podcasts, in 7 or 8 years ago, or 9 years ago, they were it's podcast. It's not it's not like real radio. It's not respectful, and then after a while that was ridiculous because I said, what a great medium, and I started understanding more about it. But it took me a year and a half to really kind of figure out, because, I'm busy, so I said, look, how can I put a process and automation, and then whatever I can't create a simple process or an automation for, what can I leverage? So I had to do that with, in order to fit my schedule, because I do that with everything: processes, automations, and leveraging. So I had to figure out what's the easiest way to do a podcast, most efficient. How can I, stockpile everything to where I'm ahead of that wave. When you start, you can't have gestation periods. It needs to be steady and consistent. So I kind of planned for it a year and a half, maybe even 2 years before that, slowly but surely listening to podcast people on how to make a podcast. I wanted to do it there. And one of the greatest people to me to listen to how to do it, because I kind of got this audio book with John Lee Dumas, who's been on my show. And to me, when you want to learn something, you go to the best. And John Lee Dumas, to me, is he just fits for me. He's the best at how to do a podcast, and everything's done by the gold standard of how he executes it. So, and he covers it full 360. So I kind of said, look, I followed him on how to do it, and just kind of strategize from there.
Yeah, John is definitely a good goal for that, or a good inspiration. One day I'd love to have him on the show, hopefully. And previously you mentioned that you have ADHD. I'd be curious to know, how has that impacted how you create long shot leaders?
It's funny because I didn't find out that I had that until later on. Somebody came into my company. They're, a very smart person, Ivy League, and I had them come on. We're at a stage. Both my parents died. No, I was switching locations from Los Angeles to Texas. I was over inundated, so I want to have them come in, and they were really a high intellect, business personality. He was very blunt, and he just beat the crap out of me every day, business wise. And I was like, okay, bring it. It was good pain. And after like a year, because his wife had ADHD, and he's like, "You got ADHD," and I was like, "Screw you! I don't got them. What? Get out of here." I've always known I've been put in a special, when I was a kid, I was put in a school for special needs, for like 6 months. I've always known I've been a little hyper and different. And there's a lot of people that have this undiagnosed, diagnosed, ADHD, but I check all the boxes apparently. And once I was able to find out what those were, first I needed to tell myself from a personal development standpoint, I told myself, this doesn't mean anything. This can mean anything I want it to mean. That was the first thing. I don't want to pay, I don't want to leave a label, and I don't want it to dictate on my performance or anything. But then I could say, well, let's find out what these key points are. And then because I was cognizant of those things, then I was able to address it. I wouldn't do long shot leaders if he really didn't mention that, a year and a half, 2 years before that. I would have done a different type of podcast, because then I was able to say, well, who am I? I want a 8 Mile, Eminem reference, my situation. So before anybody else says, well, I have to really be who I am, and I know with stand-up comedy also, I was never going to do a podcast that wasn't who I was. Everything I do, it has to be, because then it's not authentic and it's not real and it's not engaging. And how is the podcast? I will add this. The podcast has helped the ADHD because it forces me to listen to, I'm doing a lot of talking right now, but when I talk to somebody else, I am moment to moment exercising that muscle to be concentrating on the details of the conversation and what that person's talking about. And it's different than hyperfocus, because hyperfocus is something that ADHD people do really well. The hyperfocus is like, sometimes they'll be talking about something that is not your forte, but I exercise that muscle to where it's a portion of that conversation where I'm still moment to moment. And it's really been helpful. So the podcast was, not only is it, that's how I came up with the idea also with long shot leaders, and kind of exploiting that part of me, but also the podcast has helped concentration and being in the moment and listening and breaking down information as your brain is getting that information. So that's how that's helped.
That makes sense. And you did mention there that you were talking a lot, and by all means, this is your invitation to talk a lot, because I want to learn a lot about you and your podcast. But I do have to say as well that, well, from listening to your podcast, I think you do a really good job of interviewing your guests, because unlike a lot of hosts, and I think I'm sometimes guilty of this, you don't necessarily always do a lot of talking. I was listening to one of your interviews the other day, and I love the way that you ask questions to your guests, and sometimes they're quite short and precise and to the point. How do you come up with questions? Is it always something that you think up on the spot, or do you like to prepare questions beforehand?
This is an embarrassing thing to admit, but I'm going to admit it. If I have a lot of things that I'm doing, business and stand up and all these other things. I have so many things going on, and I have everything automated to set up my schedule, total do it John Lee Dumas, like Calendly, like the whole thing. And then I will look at the bio maybe 5 minutes before I talk to the person, because I speed read through the whole thing. I'll look through the whole bio. I might say, it depends on the person, how much they have to cover, but I'll go online. I'll maybe look at a little something, but I already have a format. I'm doing like a John Truby screenwriting, Save the Cat screenwriting story structure. And my story structure is, what's the origin story? What's the ghost of the person's past? What's the inciting incident? What was their moral need as they were coming up? What was what led to that? What was their dark night of the soul? I already have that as a screenwriter. I have this inherent, kind of format that I always follow. And that's inherently how I think anyways. And then as far as the questions, I really just try to go into their entire life at as a fastest clip, to really kind of go through the major milestones and cutting out the fat that doesn't matter, but seeking out the thumbprint of each person, of who they are. And then I react to, well, what does that happen? Sometimes, I mean, my interviews should be a half hour long, no longer than that. But sometimes I'll get into an hour and a half if I have to, because the answer that they gave led to something that wasn't something else and something else. So it's counterpunching, it's improvisation, it's moment to moment with an overall structure, kind of like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, if you ever watch that show.
I love that show. Yeah, yeah. Well, I love the style that you use, and it does feel very, very genuine. It makes sense that you're very much in the moment asking those questions. And I'd like to take a step back and understand the timeline of the show a little bit more. So obviously you mentioned you started in March 2021. What did the first year of podcasting look like for you until like March 2022? What did that look like?
Yeah. So when I first started, I would do an intro and an outro. The intro would talk a little bit about it. Now people understand podcasts. People have read the beginning on iTunes. They'll look at, who it is. I just go right into the person. I'm like, this is who it is. Let's go into your story. Sometimes even if they don't know it, if they want to know, do I want to spend time with this podcast? They'll go on iTunes and look at it. I jump right into the storytelling right away. So if they don't want to know, then it's kind of like a nice little story. So I just, it streamlined my process. So everything in that first year was like intro, outro, a little bit more structured. And as far as the performance, my questions were I was overexcited in the beginning, like I'd be like, I have a very expressive face, almost look like people are like, oh my God, this guy's nuts, because I've grown up in a Jewish neurotic family. So every like emotion has like been exhibited in our family. So that's me expressive. When I'm hearing something, I could be like, oh my God, or like, I'm fascinated, or like, that sounds disgusting, or, I'm very expressive. So very much so in the beginning, as to where now it's a little bit more tame, which is, I think, better, because I was so expressive, because it was a different medium. So I think now it's more streamlined. I've actually just started my second podcast, which is the Stein Time Show, which is comedians and actors. And then we're starting our third podcast, which is Bolator, which is outdoor adventure stories, because I'm launching a new company called Bolator, which has its own patented brand of outdoor products that are very unique. And we're having outdoor adventure stories on that one. So creating a new podcast is easy. There's no difference than once you've done one, it's so much. It's just a different conversation under a different name with a slightly different format of how you're going to do it. Long Shot Leaders is much different now. It's all about telling the story like it's a screenplay, going through the person's life at a fast clip. Where are you at today? What do you have planned for tomorrow? And then, how can people find you? The full, Reader's Digest version of the person's life. Stein Time Show is about, how did your career get started? Where's your career now? Where's your career going to go? And even in the micro with Bolator is, tell us about one time who you are in general overview, but let's go into one adventure story. So they're kind of like the opposite of each other. So that's how my storytelling and the podcast have changed from doing all three different types of formats of storytelling, which is long form, medium form, and very short form.
It's interesting you say, well, like once you've done one podcast, it then becomes easier to do more. I'd be curious to know if you could even summarize or give us an idea of what lessons you've learned from producing Long Shot Leaders, which you're then going to carry into these new podcasts.
It's just once you have the process, everything's most difficult in the beginning. So once you build the process, you have your infrastructure, you have a system, it's easy to duplicate the system. So to me, as far as podcast, style, more reps you do, you have, after a while, when you start anything, you have 4 levels of consciousness, right? You have, before you start it, you have unconscious incompetence. You don't know how to tie a shoe. You don't even know what that is. Then you learn how to tie a shoe, but you don't know, you haven't done it yet. So now you have conscious incompetence. Then you learn how to tie the shoe. And now you have conscious competence. And then after a while, you're so good at it. You've been doing it so many times. I think I'm at 408. Well, with other podcasts, I'm like, 450 episodes of podcasting, to where you have I'm a level right now. I think I'm hitting unconscious competence when it comes to podcasting, to where you're just doing things and you're kind of like, your subconscious is aware of what you're doing. It's in there, but you're not really consciously or sometimes when you're doing something correct, you're just doing it.
I like that idea of unconscious competence. That makes sense, because it's like anything. The more you do it, the more you just pick it up more naturally. I also wanted to say, so to give the listeners some context, Michael and I think we've had some interaction, but it hasn't been for a while. I can't remember exactly how it went down, but I worked with a company, and with my colleagues, I think maybe I either pitched Michael some guests and he liked them and they had them on the show. But I actually initially found Long Shot Leaders through Pod News. For those that don't know it, it's a podcast newsletter. And I remember seeing it, and I think it was promoted. I think maybe it was in a promotion on the newsletter. I'd be curious to know how that worked, if you've tried out promoting the show in other podcast newsletters, and if it really gave you like an ROI, or if you saw more listeners come as a result of that, or any other opportunities.
Yeah, in the beginning, you'll try a couple different things, not with the new podcast. I haven't done it, but in the beginning with the very first podcast, Long Shot Leaders, I will say, let's try this, let's try that. Does it work for us? We'll do some campaigns on this and that. Right now, I'm not familiar with a lot of those, because what I do is I use a couple different ones. I do a lot more social promotion. I use Overcast. I like Overcast. They're To me, they're a nice, stable, good. That's where people are going. That's a good, stable place to get downloads and people noticing your podcast. And then another good tool is, and I haven't done it lately, but I'll probably do it again, and I should with the new podcast. We'll probably do that. Is you promote on other people's podcasts that are same. That's really a great tool, because that's where people are going to listen. And then social. Other than that, the best thing is that if you're going to do an interview format, do something that is, it doesn't have to be super original, like MySpace. Facebook wasn't that different than MySpace. But you do need to have your own thumbprint. I think Long Shot Leaders has its own little thumbprint. So then you got to really just spit out content, enjoy what you do. And if it's an interview, it's hard. I only do interview based podcasting, because you're sharing you're sharing it with the person you interviewed, and then they're going to go out and promote it as well. So the more you do, the easier it gets, and the more promotion you get. So in the beginning, I think the question, I'm going to kind of answer it. If somebody's starting a podcast for the first time, I would say keep your costs low, but try to look on maybe Fiverr and get, Overcast, and kind of see what you can advertise, what you can build up, on your social, do everything that you can, and try it out, and then look at the analytics. I don't look at the analytics too much, because the reason I'm not trying to monetize my podcasts are a lead gen for other things that I'm doing, and as well as a passion project. So it continues to grow. It doesn't grow like crazy, but I know Long Shot Leaders has grown steadily with a graph that goes from, left to right, that constantly goes upward steadily as she goes, because I keep on getting more interviews. But that's my suggestion for the more episodes you do, the more people. And yeah, there's publications at work, but I think, to me, two best tools for growth to get more listeners is Overcast, is like a base, and then finding out a way that you can get on other people's podcasts. And then if you can advertise, get a little bit of coin, advertise on other people's podcasts, pay for it.
I think that's fantastic advice there. And of course, being the founder of Podwritten, a company that helps our clients get booked on as guests on podcasts, I'm obviously going to preach the value of that. But I'm really curious to know, like, how do you get booked on other people's podcasts?
There's like one of those couple of those pod match. I don't do anything. I just sign up for it, and then once in a while it comes in. Now, what I'll probably do, like right now, I'm not actively, I do like I'm doing yours today, but we have like Bulletor that's launching in March of 2024. So Bulletor is going to be an outdoor product that we're going to try to, we're going to build something that hopefully will be a household name. So we'll be actively using a service like you, and maybe, who knows, maybe it'll be our service. And that will be to get us interviews with every outdoor podcast on planet Earth, to not just promote the Bulletor podcast, but really promote our new launch of our product line, and talk about what it does and how it relates to, people that are feeling passionate about the outdoors. So that's kind of like, what I'll be doing in the future. But right now I don't really do much, because the more you do, the more your name's out there. People like will contact me. I'm not even going for it, at this point, but it's nice to say, hey, somebody wants to interview you, because Long Shot Leaders is like a pretty cool podcast, and we've heard about it, and we've known about it. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. I'm just really, I just meeting friends and networking. and slow build, because I'm this in this for the long haul, for more of a lifestyle.
I get that. I personally have to say, I love podcasting for the networking side of things. I think that's one of the most overlooked parts of podcasting. Most people think of it as they see it as building an audience. And yeah, that's a fantastic way of building an audience, getting in front of an audience. But even interacting with you today, it's so wonderful to have this conversation because I'm so curious about your history. And I think that you've had such a interesting life. And I really want to know more about it. And that's why I'm here. And then obviously, you've been kind enough to invite me on your show. And I can't wait to share my stories. And this never would have happened if we hadn't been so invested in podcasting. So I think, yeah, networking is a fantastic like bonus when it comes to starting your own podcast or just being on podcast as a guest.
Yeah, I mean, you're in Columbia. I'm in Georgetown, Texas. How awesome is that? And I'm from Encino, California, and you're from England.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. Like our paths never would have crossed. So it's a fantastic space to be in. I really love it. So I feel very blessed to be in this space. But I want to take us back to something. You obviously another thing that you mentioned there was you've kind of promoted the show in the past, like on socials. What social media channels do you use and how do you use them? Like, do you produce audiograms or do you take another approach?
It's funny. My social's been such a ADHD mess in the past, so I mean, I've done everything wrong. I've done something right for like maybe a week or two, and then it'll fall off the wayside. No consistency. Family stuff mixed in with business stuff, mixed in with passion project. Oh, it's just so crazy. So now I just recently, because we're revamping everything, and I just signed up with a social marketing, specifically for TikTok, because I have a TikTok. But he's like, look, this is what you're going to do. You're going to do it this time, and this is what you're going to, this kind of content that you said that you want to kind of know. So this is how you're going to do it and everything. So I have TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter. Well, now it's called X. So I have it all, and it's not consistent. So one thing at a time. So what I'm doing this week is I'm starting to build content, and I'll probably have it, start being on a consistent basis in 2 weeks for TikTok. And it's got to be niched, not too nichey for TikTok because it's a little more loose. You need to be more nichey for YouTube, but it's got to be consistent. And there's a way to go about it, and it's got to, find out what's going to be working and then stick with that, because inconsistency and then contrasting concepts don't really do well. So as far as my social is concerned, because I'm an entrepreneur that sells a widget, we need to have everything. And the personal brand this day and age, the CEO and founder needs to be is the brand. That's like plot is character in a movie screen. The character is plot. No difference that the CEO is the plot of the company now, and all that has to do with social media. So I believe you need to have every channel. It needs to be taken care of. They all need to be consistent, and whether you're going to be super busy in the beginning. With me, I've already strategized. I have virtual assistants that I'm going to be attacking on each one of those for the launch of Bolator, and that's what we're doing with that. But that's what my social looks like in the next near future.
Fantastic. Very widespread approach. That's cool. And it's a lot of work, but obviously like the reward is there if you nail it. And certainly I've seen like sometimes you can just see one social media take off. Even if you put your efforts in all of them, you might just see one snowball and then that's great. And you maybe put your focus there. I am someone that is I think social is my weakest side personally. I'm always more interested in podcasting, but I know social can be incredibly useful for growing a podcast. But I do want to take us on to another topic away from social. And we've obviously spoken about getting yourself booked on other people's podcasts, but you obviously have guests for your show. And I want to know, how do you get your guests?
Well, I have a VA, virtual assistant, and I spreadsheet out, a want list, and I'll do that. Or there's Podmatch, and people will contact me. Or if I find somebody, sometimes I won't get back if there's like no long shot story there, or it's not a good fit. We don't really entertain it at all. But we will, if it fits, I'll try to just slam it in there as much as possible, depending on the schedule. And I dedicate, my Fridays. I think part of Wednesday in the evening, part of got some time open on Thursdays in my Calendly, and then I do open for all of Friday, which is the most of the content that we record, and then one slot on a Saturday and one slot on a Sunday, and that really keeps us open. And that's kind of like how I get my guests from those channels and how often I do it. John Lee I think says try to compile 6 weeks in the bank as far as episodes, and I think that's a good practice. So that's why I do. So those are my avenues and how much I build up on the episodes.
Yeah, I definitely think planning ahead is important because one of the things that I've noticed in podcasting is that when you have that space, when you've got that room to breathe, you're more likely to make well-informed decisions when it comes to quality. You're not stressed. Whereas if you do feel like crap, I got to put a show out within the next few days, then you scramble to put something together. That's when quality can sometimes take a hit because you're trying to meet those deadlines, and that's a situation maybe I think I found myself in years ago when I started podcasting, but it's so nice to be able to have that mental safety of thinking, you know what, it's okay, I can work on this and it doesn't need to go out for another like 4, 5, 6 weeks or whatever. It's nice having that space.
Absolutely. Once again, when you set up a process in place and you're doing it yourself, sometimes that's not sustainable. But if it's going to be successful, we're using it for different reasons. So like the podcast wouldn't pay for all this, but with these virtual assistants, you set up a schedule, you have Google, spreadsheet docs that you're sharing, and everything is kind of like either it's you have a process for it, and then you can automate it through Calendly or Zapier or certain things and automatic emails, and whatever that can't be done there, then you leverage it off to a VA, to where it frees you up to where you're just doing the interviews, you're loading everything on a Dropbox or your personal file, and then they're grabbing it and they're editing it and they're posting it, and then you're off to a nice place to where you can spit that content out. And it's nice to know that you have that in Libsyn already loaded, already scheduled. You go on there maybe once a month and you look at it and go, yep, they're doing their job. And then you go on Apple iTunes and like, yep, it was loaded up yesterday. That's great. I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, when you can outsource things to people you trust that they're gonna do a good job, that just makes the process way smoother. That's fantastic. And I wanted to ask, you obviously receive pitches. We know that. How many do you receive usually of people wanting to be on the show in like any given week?
I get about like 20 a
Oh
day.
wow. Okay. And
Yeah,
and
a lot.
yeah, that is a lot. There's a lot to go through. There's a full inbox right there. And of course, the idea of your show is like you want to interview long shot leaders. What do you look for in these pitches? Like what stands out to you as a long shot leader? Would you be able to give like some examples or what someone would need to include?
Yeah, somebody that's really like has a not just a skill set, because but somebody has has like overcame something that's substantial. Or there's a different type of long shot. There's rarefied air. So there's two different avenues. Somebody that's started at a low point. I'll give you two examples. One is I had Ben Lesser, who was a Holocaust survivor. That's a no-brainer, right? He's 94 years old, and he was in there when he was 15, and he went through a Tour de France of like most unbelievable. That was my longest episode, and it was my most important because I'm a Jewish guy and grew up with those stories. My grandmother escaping the Russian concentration camps, and then it was very emotional and very intense. Then there was another guy who's a friend of mine. He clicked with me. He was homeless since he was 12 to 24. Since then, he got himself off the streets. He got a job, and then he got, now he's got his own little business, and he just bought his own house in Omaha, and it's not like it's not like a super wealthy dude, but that's the juxtaposition, the contrast between where he started, where he is now. Then there's a third scenario, and that is rarefied air. So let's say somebody is like, like I have Olympians, or I've had somebody that lived on the space shuttle for 8 months. Well, he did have a long shot story though, because this guy tried out to like become an astronaut over and over and over and over and over again, years, but there's rarefied air to where they might have not had so much of a long shot story, but they are super achieved, so those are three different scenarios I look for. Somebody that is like has started really low and now they're super successful, or somebody that started so low, they went from super bad to like, a really big jump to where they are today. And then somebody that's like so-called silver spoon, but then they invented or did something that was rarefied. I just look for like a contrast between where they started to where they are now. That's the main thing.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And I'd love to know more about like the technical side of your setup. You mentioned that you use Libsyn. Why did you pick this platform, and do you like it?
I do. I do research for everything. I do a lot of Libsyn versus this or this versus this, YouTube, versus. And I try to find the best. If you're going to do something, what's the best? How much does it cost? And how much time does it take? So you got to ask all those questions, but I'm very methodical. Libsyn it fit for me and my brain, and how it could be sustainable, because I'm trying to shave seconds off of minutes and minutes off of hours. So like if I say, look, this seems, and it's the best, then I chose that. So I use Zoom for my meetings. I use Libsyn for my downloads. I have a Rode mic, uh, the really good one. I forgot what model it is. I'm looking at it right now. It's the big long. It's like a foot long. It looks robust. I'm not stuck to too much of a budget, so I get what's really good. And then I got the Rodecaster mixing board. I got the old one from 2 years ago, and I just bought the new one because I got a separate area that I do. I do two different locations that I do podcasting, and those are great because you just it just cleans up the audio. It mixes everything nice automatically. It's turnkey. Yeah, that's my whole setup right there. Record the episode after Zoom download to my save it on my desktop, drag it. I'll create a file in Dropbox. Two different podcasts. One I have a ShareSync, which has unlimited amount of ShareSync is like a Microsoft product, unlimited amount of storage. But I'll also do Dropbox. Long story short, loaded in Dropbox under a file with that person's name. My VA goes in there. She'll take it. She'll edit it. Then she'll load it into a finished file. My other VA, she'll grab that file, go on to Libsyn. She will load it up. I've given her the format of how I wanted the descriptions and the keywords and how everything's done on Libsyn. And then she also she loads everything onto my WordPress website, and then, creates the episode. We have a format for that. All this when I do Calendly, a lot of times they're leaving the bio. She has my login to Calendly. So I have everything on Calendly. It's like, what's your bio? It'll say they're in Calendly. Here's your email. Here's their phone number. Here's all that information. So she has all that to load up on our WordPress. And then when the episode comes out, she will send them on behalf of me the episode information, which is same format every time. And they'll say, hey, underneath my name on my email or all my social links, so we could stay in touch, and some other call to actions for the guest. And that's pretty much it. And it's turnkey, and it's just like clockwork. You got to find a good, dependable VA to make sure that's executed. But that's pretty much the process.
That's a very smooth process, and obviously you got a great setup there, and it shows in the quality of your show. What you pay for is very much what you get, so that's no surprise there. And as we kind of like come towards the end of the show, that I want to ask some like kind of bigger questions, really, and I want to know, what do you consider to be your greatest success in podcasting?
Well, that's easy for me. I think it's, I really wanted to do a good job when Ben Lesser, who's the Holocaust survivor, and I said, you know what? I don't care what kind of movie star, because I've had, people that I've really admired, like Carl Gottlieb, who wrote Jaws, which I've quoted that thing. And I love Carl Gottlieb. And then Jeff Ark, who's like a personal development guy, and he wrote Sleepless in Seattle. I love those guys big time. And I was like, because I'm a writer, I'm a screenplay writer. I was like, I can't wait to, and that was big. But to me, what's valuable to a lot of people and what's rare? What seems important? Like if a Martian was going to come down from to planet Earth, and he was going to listen to a podcast, what would you record for that Martian? And to me, Ben Lesser, which was my first, like month 4, I was podcasting. I took my time with the intro. I took my time, and I let him do most of the talking, because he was like a beautiful trained horse, like your horseback rider. He knew the trail because he's talked about it so many times. And then it was a 2-part podcast. I had to break it up in 2 different episodes. To me, that was my proudest moment. I could hear my grandmother and my mom crying from, somewhere, like just, because it was important for being growing up with, hearing the story about the Russian concentration camps again. And then I cry, my friends joke around that I make a lot of people cry sometimes on my podcast because they're talking about the personal life. Well, actually, Ben Lesser, he made me cry because what he was talking about was so intense and it was like Schindler's List entrenched in this like really intense, like story. And the stories I couldn't, it was sensationalistic, but it had to be heard and it wasn't gratuitous. So I would say that definitely was the most best podcasting episode. It's not like it's like I'm sure people can understand. Not like I don't appreciate everybody else, but that one was just so intense. And and look, a lot of these people are not around anymore. And this guy actually has a tattoo on his arm, and it was just so incredibly, he was so gracious in sharing it. So I can go on and on about that one, but that's the one that stands out the most.
That makes sense. And it's so wonderful that that's what you feel is like the high point of your podcasting, I suppose, experience. That's really nice that you had that kind of emotional interaction and that opportunity to connect with your own history in a way, through podcasting. Now, before we go, I want to know if you have any advice for our listeners who are looking to grow their audience. What last nuggets of wisdom would you want to share with our audience?
Okay. I would get a spreadsheet, take spreadsheet, and then build the avatar of your customer. So simple, not too hard. Just build on what the avatar, if you don't know what it is, what is your person, the listener, like who do you want to talk to? Just write down your ideas. This is my ideas. These are all my ideas. Write down the bad ideas and the good ideas, because when we write down the bad ideas, they get out of your head. So you record that. You could edit later. But then write down, the spreadsheet of avatar of the customer. You could look that online what that is. But basically, it's like, what was, after you find out your niche or whatever, what is the person that's going to listen to? What kind of music they listen to? What kind of movies they like? What's their political affiliations? What's this and this? Just kind of get scope of the whole situation, and then start to listen to other podcasts, and then listen to podcasts that you want to do. Start to write down everything, write down your actions, write down and prepare everything in advance. If you really want a successful podcast, your episodes, you're going to grow through consistency and time. So you want to really make sure you have episodes in the bank. So you want to really strategize. People say start right away. I disagree with that, but you do need a back date. You need to say, look, here's this, once you get scope and then you understand exactly what you have to do, then you have to say to yourself, how long will it take me to do this? And you say, well, it's going to take me a full 4 months to prepare. All right. So prepare for that full months, 4 months. Then I would say add a month on top of that just for, just to make sure that you can accomplish this. And then you backdate it. And then you say, here's the end date. I've gave myself an extra month or 2 even, and say, I have to do it. That's my launch date. And then write down all the action items and everything you need to do. And you YouTube how-tos and you do everything you can and you make sure that you have all that done. And that's the systematic way to do anything, really. Bigger projects take longer, but I wouldn't start until you're ready to make sure that everything's set and ready to go. Because if it's not, you're going to lose steam. You're going to stumble. Your podcast isn't going to be as good as it can be. You're not going to get as many listeners because you're inconsistent. So with podcasting, you need to start and never end, and be consistent. So you need to strategize and plan. And I would map everything out. And it doesn't have to be hard, but I would just definitely put it down. Whether you like to write things down on paper, I'm more of like a spreadsheet person's like, wait, because I got to know the dates and I got to see everything in chronological order. It's like, now I need to do this, and I would do that. That's my best advice that I can give.
I get you. I'm a spreadsheet guy myself. So that makes absolute sense. And I think that's some fantastic wisdom to end the show on. And Michael, obviously people can go check out Long Shot Leaders, but if they want to keep up to date with you, what you're working on, obviously these business ventures that you're getting into, what's the best way for them to do that?
Go to michaelsteinmedia.com and you'll see information on the 3 podcasts that I mentioned, the Long Shot Leaders, the Stein Time Show, and Bullet Tour podcast, with launches at the end of the year. You'll see my bio story. You'll see my social links are attached there. And that's it. You'll be able to see everything you need going to michaelsteinmedia.com.
Fantastic. Well, there you have it, folks. Long Shot Leaders with Michael Stein. Please go check it out, listen to it, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, and make sure you leave a review. Michael, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Sam. Absolute pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, you can find more helpful resources to grow your business with podcasting on our blog at podwritten.com and on Instagram at podwritten. You can also find a full transcript for this episode on our website, so be sure to visit podwritten.com or follow the links in the episode description. Until next time, stay healthy, happy, and successful.